If you have a Bible this morning, I want to encourage you to turn to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 16, the third Gospel, the Gospel of Luke, chapter 16. 40 years ago, this coming October, there was a group of men who gathered together. These men were not very normal men. In fact, they were very abnormal men. They did for their hobby and for their living, they lifted weights to such an extreme, they coined the phrase bodybuilders. They got together 40 years ago and they began a contest that we now know as Mr. Olympia, where the finest and the strongest weightlifters and bodybuilders in the world gather together to compete against one another. It was a contest that was much in obscurity for 10 years. Until 1975, there was a young man from Austria named Arnold Schwarzenegger who came to the picture. He won 6 straight years, retired from bodybuilding, and came back in 1985, and he won it again. 7 titles. Mr. Olympia, now Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. Last decade, there was a man by the name of Lee Haney who matched Arnold's record. He won 7 Mr. Olympias. Only he didn't win them in 2 separate sets. He won them consecutively 7 in a row. In 2 months, the 40th anniversary of Mr. Olympia will commence. There's a young man by the name of Ronnie Coleman. Ronnie Coleman is aiming for his 8th straight Mr. Olympia contest. He hails from Arlington, Texas. He's a mammoth man. He stands just shy of 6 foot tall, and he's over 300 pounds, and there is no fat on his body. Only this year's contest, as he competes against those men that he competes against all the time in other sub-contests, there is a competitor that will be there from Russia. His name is Alexander Fedorov. Alexander stands 6'1", and when he's at his contest weight, he's at 280 pounds, which means that walking around today, he's about 320 pounds of solid rock muscle. He comes from St. Petersburg, Russia. His training style is a little bit different than the style of those guys here in the United States of America. He doesn't have a fancy gym membership. No, the gym in which Alexander Fedorov works out in is actually a graveyard. That's right, a cemetery. And there's a building there in St. Petersburg where the caretaker of the cemetery and all the such that goes on there, they come in and they change their clothes and they get their different tools and the things they need. He and his friends and his dad have set up a makeshift gym. All the equipment that they use is 20, 30, and 40 years of age. Oftentimes you can't even tell how much weight they're lifting because the numbers have been rubbed off from the wear. They just lift until it hurts, so to speak. The article in which I read about Alexander, it said that the walls of his gym are caked, not in millimeters, but in inches of mildew and mold. It stinks, it's dirty, it's cold, it doesn't have a heater. But in Las Vegas, Nevada, this October, Alexander Fedorov is going to get up on stage with the strongest, most sculpted men in all of the world. And we're going to see the difference. See, a couple months ago, Alexander came to the United States of America. Because he's such a large man and he is so good at what he does in the bodybuilding world, they toured him to all the great bodybuilding facilities, one of which is the Mecca of bodybuilding, Venice, California. The place that Arnold Schwarzenegger put on the map, Mr. Olympia has hailed. Millions and millions and millions of dollars have been spent in this workout facility there in Venice Beach, California. They have the finest equipment. They have the finest trainers. They have the finest supplements. Anything you need and or want to promote bodybuilding, weightlifting, or any type of exercise, the place to go is Venice Beach, California. They've got it all. Every type of medication, every type of supplement, every type of equipment. A few months ago when he was being toured, he didn't say a whole lot. So afterwards, the reporter asked him, they said, Alexander, what did you think about Venice Beach? I mean, compared to where you work out, where there's mildew and mold and it's cold and you can't even see how much weight you're really lifting. What do you think about Venice Beach, California? To which he replied a very interesting quote. He said, I saw a lot of posing, but I didn't see a lot of lifting. I saw a lot of posing. I didn't see a lot of lifting. I've got a warning for those American guys who are going to compete against Alexander in 2 months. While you've been posing in front of a mirror, Alexander's been lifting. Folks, let me state that what he said about that gym in California can be said about a lot of our biblical studies and a lot of our theologies and a lot of our Christianity in America. We do a lot of posing. We don't do much lifting. Luke chapter 16. Jesus tells a story that shows us 2 men. One who posed and one who lifted. And what you're going to see in the end is an incredibly diametrically opposed difference in circumstances. Luke chapter 16, beginning in verse 19, it says, "There was a certain rich man, which was clothed in purple and fine linen, and he fared sumptuously every day. And there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, which was laid at the gate full of sores, and desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. It came to pass that the beggar died, was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried." Verse 23, "And in hell he lifted up his eyes, being in torments. He seeth Abraham afar off and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried, and he said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. But Abraham said, Son, remember that thou in thy lifetime receivest thy good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted, and thou art tormented. And besides all this, between us and you there is a great gulf fixed, so that they which would pass from hence to you cannot, neither can they pass to us that would come from thence. Then he said, I pray thee therefore, Father, that thou wouldst send him my father's house. For I have 5 brethren, that he may testify unto them, lest they also come into this place of torment. Abraham said unto him, They have Moses and the prophets. Let them hear them. He said, No, Father Abraham, but if one went unto them from the dead, they will repent. He said unto him, If they hear not Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rose from the dead." 2 men, Lazarus and a, quote, certain rich man. Now there are those who claim that what Jesus is telling us here is a parable. Simply put, a parable is a fictitious story that has truth or truths lying behind it. But let me state very clearly, this is not a parable. People claim that it's a parable because it says a certain rich man. I'll explain that in just a moment. But certain things I want you to understand are this. Jesus tells 33 parables that we have recorded in the 4 Gospels. In none of those parables does he use somebody's first name. Here he says Lazarus and Abraham. He uses the first names of 2 distinct people. In addition to that, in the other parables that Jesus tells, never do you have 2 characters that talk to each other within the parable. And here you have the rich man in hell and and Abraham actually having a conversation. So the question becomes this: why would Jesus begin a certain rich man? Understand, much like the town we reside in, the world in which Jesus walked was not a very populated place. Everybody knew everybody's business. Here is the story about a man who most likely within the congregation had family and friends and business partners. Most likely he was recently deceased. Beyond that, Jesus did very specifically mention who he was. He said, the certain rich man of which Lazarus begged at his gate. In other words, you know whose house I'm talking about. The guy where Lazarus was always there and the dog was always licking his sores. That's the guy I'm talking about. You say, well, why didn't he just give us his name? Because Jesus was a perfect gentleman. Even though he gives some harsh truth here, he didn't just say, Joe Blow out there, he's in hell right now. He said, no, I'm going to let you figure this one out for yourself. There was a certain rich man that we all know. We all know where he lived. We all know what he did. But when you get down to it, unlike Lazarus, he did a lot of posing. It looked good. I'm sure he got up every morning in his makeshift mirror of some sort and he looked at what his clothes looked like. I'm sure he got his wallet out and he said, well, how fat is it today? He checked the business paper, so to speak. Everything in his life looked good in the mirror. But after he breathed his last breath, he found out he hadn't lifted anything. And here's a man by the name of Lazarus, who's doing nothing but lifting. He's lifting the pain of a body gone bad. He's lifting the pain of family not being around him. He's lifting the agony of having to sit at another man's door and hope that somehow, some way, the crumbs from his table can get to him before the dogs get it. Lazarus is doing a lot of lifting and no posing. But when the judgment comes for both of these men's lives, one finds himself in heaven. One finds himself in hell. which is the other issue I want to deal with before I get to meat here, is this. In verse 23, it says, and in hell.